Do you want to do this?
Hello, I am Solstiza Astrologer. I am creating this channel so that you can join me to look at astrology in the birth charts of famous people who are there in the limelight. I will start this month of October with cases of murderers. But if you want me to look at any specific case, any issue, any person, if you have time, data, and it is a famous person, that is, it is something of common interest to all, I will gladly analyze them. As I told you, in this month of October, we are going to start with cases of murderers, specifically with the case of the Menendez family. So stay tuned because there is a lot to unveil. Let's start with the birth chart of Lyle Menendez. Birth chart of Lyle Menendez. I have as data that he was born on January 10, 1968 at 12:10 p.m. in New York, United States. Since he was born at this time, he obviously has the sun in the midheaven. He has it in the sign of Capricorn, and it rules his 4th, 5th house. He has the moon in Taurus in the 1st house. He rules the 3rd house, that is the brother. And he has the ascendant also in Taurus, like the moon. The moon is exalted in Taurus, that is, that moon is magnified there. It has a Taurus ascendant, and its ruler Venus is in Sagittarius in the 8th house. If we look, we can see that the moon and the sun are making a beautiful trine, and there is a lot of the earth element in his house. Actually, most of it is the earth element. Lyle has the sun in Capricorn, an earth sign, the moon in Taurus, an earth sign, ascendant in an earth sign. And in addition, we find that Mercury is in Capricorn, earth, and that Jupiter, Pluto, and Uranus are in Virgo, the other earth sign. That is to say, a person with many elements on earth. What does this give him? Well, to be a very materialistic, practical, concrete person with many attachments to material things. If we observe a detail in this natal chart, the sun and the moon have a beautiful trine. That is to say, there is a certain inner harmony in him. Because having the moon and the sun in a good aspect gives a kind of inner balance, of inner coherence. We also see that the moon and the sun are in very angular houses. The moon is in the 1st house and the sun in the 10th house. That is, a person who likes to be looked at. Well, with the analysis of Lyle Menendez's chart, I want to continue with a generational question. Then we are going to observe the transpersonal or transsaturnine planets. That is, if we go out to the sky and look, we can see up to Saturn. But to look a little bit further, we need a telescope. Those planets that are a little bit beyond, which are Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Chiron, speak to us of generations, of times, very specific. Lyle Menendez was born at a time when all those planets were in conversation. Pluto and Uranus in Virgo had just passed that partal conjunction that marked a whole generation and a very tremendous era. In the decade of the 60s, there was this conjunction, Pluto-Uranus in Virgo. What did this conjunction leave us, or how did it manifest itself? Well, let's say that Uranus is technological advances, technology, and Pluto is going beyond the limits. What was it giving us? Well, the precedent for preparing the crop for the trip to the moon, for example. Those were the years when the hippie movements took place. And women were able to begin to position themselves, the uncovering, the contraceptive pill, abortion. In other words, it was a decade of great revolutions at a historical level. Besides, they have a beautiful sextile with Neptune. That happened for many years, that aspect. It marked great transformations at the internal level of humanity, at the spiritual level, because of that relationship with Neptune. But what is disturbing here is that much more concretely in the year 68, when Lyle Menendez was born, if you can look, Chiron was in opposition to Pluto-Uranus, in the midpoint between Pluto and Uranus. Just in opposition. What was that telling us? Look, just thinking about Chiron and Pluto in opposition, we are talking about Chiron being the wound of the soul and Pluto being the underworld, the inner hell. We are talking about a person whose great wound is in his inner hell. It is a person who is offended by Chiron, Pluto, and with Uranus. That is very painful. Also that Chiron is in the 12th house and Pluto and Uranus are in the 6th house. That is talking about disturbances, even at the mental level, health, and so on. This generation, because this is a generation in particular, it's not just Lyle. We are talking about 68. What happened in 68 historically? If you look at it, Martin Luther King was killed, Robert Kennedy was killed. America gave up and got out of the Vietnam War. But if there's one thing we'll all remember 68 for, it's May 68 in France. Remember that? May 68. So what is this telling us? That those Chiron aspects in opposition to Pluto and Uranus are giving like rebellions, big protests. That is to say, it was a very, very revolutionary year, very compulsive at a historical level for humanity, and it gave characters like Lyle Menendez, who are characterized by being tremendously individualistic, by being people who want to leave a mark and leave a mark in history. Well, what traits does this Pluto-Uranus, Chiron-Neptune opposition and so on give us? Well, it gives us people who want to leave a mark in history, who are going to leave a mark. And they are probably all these people who are now in their 50s, more or less, who are tremendously individualistic. And we are going to be very clear about this, because one also belongs to one's time and to one's social conditioning. So, well, Lyle Menendez is a very individualistic person with these signs. Now let's look at Lyle's chart, where Saturn and Jupiter are, which are the other two planets that mark the history of mankind. Saturn is in Aries in the 12th house, and Jupiter is in Virgo in the 5th house. Saturn rules the 10th house, where the Sun is, and both planets, the Sun and Saturn, are the signifiers of the father figure. So, well, this Sun in the 10th house marks a very powerful father figure, very omnipotent, or a mother figure that occupied the functions of father. You can also associate this Sun in the 10th house, because the 10th house is often related to the maternal house. But what is clear is that Saturn in the 12th house speaks of a father figure in which he did not assimilate the law. A person with Saturn in the 12th house does not have norms, does not have rules, is a person who finds it difficult to structure. In addition, Saturn in the 12th house gives him the feeling of having been betrayed. Also, a person with Saturn in the 12th house is very secretive about things. Because of this, it is very likely that many things in this story we do not know. And if this is the exact hour of Lyle Menendez, he also has the point of misfortune in conjunction there. The point of misfortune is an Arabic point, where the great difficulties or bad and unpleasant things in life are going to be manifested. The 12th house is also the prenatal, and having Saturn in the 12th house is already telling us that it was rejected from the womb. That is why I will always believe that the great dream and longing of Lyle Menendez is to have been loved by his mother. Besides, I want to add to this Saturn that beautiful trine with Venus in the 8th house. Notice what a curious thing, that this Venus is in Sagittarius, whose ruler is Jupiter, is already in a Venus-Jupiter quadrature. That is to say, so that you understand me, Saturn, Mars, Venus, and Jupiter are in conversation. It's very curious to look at Saturn-Venus in trine. Why? Because they're talking about the love commitment figure that he develops. And evidently Saturn in the 12th house is telling us that he did it in jail, right? And so it was. So that is very visible in his chart. Well, these four planets, Mars and Venus, which are personal planets, together with Saturn and Jupiter, are all there in conversation. And that conversation is complicated. It's not so simple. It has a lot of squaring, a lot of quincunx, despite that beautiful trine that Saturn and Venus have. It has a very strange relationship with love, with affection, with libido, with masculinity. There is also Mars opposition Jupiter, which makes him a tremendously impulsive person. Notice, a person with so many earth elements, as now we are going to analyze the relationship of the moon, the sun, with all the other elements of his natal chart, which are practically all connected. We could see that this was the chart of a tremendously brilliant person who came to show off and leave a mark in a positive way. But unfortunately, he has a series of very disruptive aspects in his chart that make him a tremendously complex and complicated person. Hey, are you paying attention to me? Well, the moment you've been waiting for has arrived. Subscribe, like, and if you have any opinion or question, leave it in the comment. Well, I also want to point out the fact that there are so many entities in the 12th house, Chiron, Saturn, and the nodal axis, the North Node, the head of the dragon. That is to say, that North Node is already telling us that he also had to come to learn very important things in that seclusion that he had to live. I think it was the process he had to go through. And that is how it is. The birth chart is like a life sentence. It is very curious that nodal axis that is in relation with this Pluto. And now we are going to give way to this beautiful trine that you can see here is Moon, Sun, and Pluto, which is also indirectly related to Mercury, Uranus, Chiron, Neptune in this very complicated journey. So let's try to solve it a little bit. Another characteristic of this Saturn quincuntium Jupiter is going to be tremendously wasteful. Well, let's look now at that beautiful trine between the Moon, the Sun, and Pluto, in which there are really very few degrees of difference. The Moon and the Sun are 4 degrees apart, and Pluto and the Moon are in a partile trine, and Pluto with the Sun is in a trine of -3 degrees. In other words, it is a valid trine in astrology, and you have to look at it. What is this beautiful triangle telling us? Well, that is a person with a lot of power, with a capacity of command, dominance, and manipulation. That Pluto makes him tremendously cunning, and a person with an enormous ability to handle whatever he wants. Well, let's go back again to that Sun as a father figure, which curiously is in the 10th house. Would we see that he was manipulated by the father? Or was he also a great manipulator? I think Lyle Menendez is a great manipulator with this beautiful trine. Only that trine in the life of a person who can get to have that Pluto, Sun, and Moon trine, as in this birth chart, can be extremely bright people who are making terrific professional lives. But well, let's remember that Pluto is offended by Chiron, and there is also Uranus. So there is a certain virulence behind that beautiful trine, because if you see, that trine has 2 crosses, 2 very strong stripes. One is Chiron-Pluto in opposition, and the other is Mars-Jupiter in opposition. Those 2 crosses, that's crossed. Well, what's the other axis that crosses it? It's that Moon in opposition to Neptune. Look at this for what it is. This is very strong in a person's birth chart. Let's turn now to remember that Moon. That Moon, the ruler of his 3rd house, the brother, is in opposition to Neptune. This already makes the Moon tremendously confusing. The mother figure, childhood, which is what the Moon means in a person's life, which is childhood. Now I want us to place ourselves and concentrate a lot on that natal moon of Lyle Menendez. In that opposition of that moon with Neptune, that makes him a somewhat deceitful person, and this must be taken into account. How is a person with the moon in the 1st house? Let us keep in mind that the moon is our emotional life, our childhood, our protection, where we are sheltered, and if it is in the 1st house, it is as if we did not have it, and not as if we ourselves had to be that figure that constantly provides for us. So, with which we find a moon that is constantly in an emotional state. That is to say, the moon is the protection. What covers us, protects us, supplies us, nourishes us in some way. So, having the moon in the 1st house is as if there were no one to protect you at certain times. It is a little unprotected, but you also find children who want to get attention and throw tantrums. In short, it is a moon that has an emotional lack in itself, that nothing is enough for it on an emotional level. She is in this opposition with Neptune, which makes her to be probably that many times they speak of an alcoholic mother, mentally ill. Also in turn, it produced illnesses to him. And if we take into account that Chiron opposes Pluto-Uranus in the 6 to 12 axis, then yes, we are probably also talking about a person who has many psychopathic traits, even with that beautiful trine of the Moon, Sun, Pluto. Manipulative to the max. I already said that he has a lot of disruptive things in his natal chart as well, even though at first glance one sees that divine trine. Well, we continue with that moon. That moon has something that is perhaps what is going to make the difference between this birth chart of Lyle Menendez and the birth chart of many other people who may have similar configurations in their birth chart, and that is where the moon is. The moon, as we know, moves very fast. so there is not so much coincidence in a birth chart. It turns out that this moon in Lyle Menendez's birth chart is very close to the Algol star, which is a malefic star. I'm going to read to you what the Algol star means in this book I found by Patricia Kesselman, which makes a selection of the fixed stars and their mythological significance. Algol is the head of the jellyfish, also called Kaput Algol. Its name comes from the Arabic Al-Ghul, which means the demon and the evil spirit, the devil, more exactly the one who wears the head of the devil. Algol is at 25 degrees and the moon is at 23 degrees. But it turns out that Algol really is a star in the constellation Perseus, which let's say has 5 sisters, and it has a 9-hour cycle, and every 9 hours it covers them and lets you see them, covers them and lets you see them. All these stars are considered to have a saturnal and tragic energy. Well, one of these 5 sister stars of Algol is called Capulus, and that one is at 23 degrees exact, partile with Lyle Menendez's natal moon. This is already telling us that he had a tragic childhood, that the mother did not protect him, and in fact with that opposition, the moon and Neptune, the mother did not nurture him, did not know how to be there, did not know how to protect him in many moments, and probably had a very pathological relationship with the mother. Very tragic. He was already marking his life, his childhood. It was a very hard and difficult childhood. He is a person whose parents probably did commit terrible things with him. For me, being with Neptune there in front of him, and Neptune being in exact opposition to Algol, he is telling me that the mother was horrible. The mother figure, poor thing. And the father, for me, is almost a very absent figure. And if he marked something in his life, it was probably very, as of things that he had to hide. With Saturn in the 12th house, he had to hide what his father did with him somehow. To say that the father went overboard with him, because you had to look at the Mars-Pluto relationship. Mars, the libido, and Pluto, our primal energy, our sexuality. But in this natal chart, Mars and Pluto have no relationship. Dad didn't go overboard. Maybe with that moon opposite Neptune, it's much more of an investment world. But we are talking about a person whose childhood was very, very cloudy. And believe me, in this case, there are many things that we do not see that are practically a nebula, because now we are going to look at the letter from his brother, from Eric Menendez, and we are also going to find very complicated things in his childhood. Well, let's see what was positive about this chart, because it must have positive things. That Mercury in Capricorn in the 10th house. It makes you probably a good speaker, a person who knows how to write. One of the data of Saturn in the 12th house is to have been betrayed, and he has a very nice Mercury. He probably has a good storytelling ability, and he must have set out to write a book. And I think that the partner who became his partner after he went to prison, to whom he told the whole story, and who was in charge of writing the book, betrayed him. That is very typical of a Saturn in the 12th house. But this Mercury in 10 is nice. It is beautiful. It has a tribune with Pluto. That means that he is a person who knows how to manipulate with words as well. It only remains for me to add that moon that is with a little cross in the ascendant of the air. It is called Lilith, or Black Moon, and it is exactly that, the dark part of the moon. It is an energy about our life. Lilith, in short, mythologically, she was Adam's first wife. And well, when Adam said to her, "Let go, you have to submit," she said no and rebelled against Adam. Then God punished her very badly by killing every child she had. Lilith is also a woman who had a great sexual appetite, the first great feminist in history. So every planet at home, one is I am that planet. One identifies with that planet. Well, in this case, it would be Lilith. Well, who gives Lyle to have Lilith there? Well, to have rebelled against the father, as Lilith did. Probably a voracious sexual appetite. And another thing that gives Lilith in the ascendant is charisma, magnetism, attraction. Well, one looking at this astrological chart of Lyle Menendez thinks it says victim or executioner. This is a human being who was either a victim or an executioner. I believe that with that very difficult moon in his birth chart related to everything, with Pluto, with Uranus, with Chiron, with Neptune, in that position, talking about the fact that this person had a very, very turbid childhood. With that Saturn in the 12th house, we're probably never going to know, because he never wants us to know. For Lyle Menendez, keeping his secrets is very important, and basically because he has probably been betrayed many times. but we are also talking about a manipulative person, lawless, impulsive, tormented by many things, with an immense inner hell. Victim or executioner? Man, I also think he was a bit of an executioner. In other words, he is also an executioner. We also see the astrological chart of a manipulative person with uncontrolled emotionality, with a law, with very compulsive traits, very reflexive in many ways, very ambitious, very uncontrolled, very wasteful. Probably pathologies created by all that treatment he had in childhood. So, victim and executioner. Well, that concludes the analysis of Lyle Menendez's birth chart. If you liked it and you want me to keep uploading this kind of content, then subscribe, like it, and well. Now let's go to Eric Menendez's chart. Well, that's all for today. A big hug says goodbye to all of you, and until our next video. A big hug.